Hi, I'm Karen Shuey from Lancaster Newspapers. Welcome to our hangout on Google Plus with Bob Casey, Pennsylvania's Democratic U.S. Senator. We'll be talking about the scandals rocking Washington right now, as well as the Senator's thoughts on issues affecting local residents, plus his opinions on the governor's 2014 race. Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you for joining us on Google Plus.
Thank you, Karen. Good to be with you.
It seems the White House is in damage control right now. First, there was the Benghazi hearing that raised questions about the honesty of the Obama administration. Then there was the admission by the IRS that they targeted conservative groups. And finally, the discovery that the Justice Department seized records belonging to the AP. What are your thoughts on some of those issues?
Well, first, I think that the controversy, which is of the most significance to most Americans, of course, is what happened when the IRS engaged in a process. The so-called exempt organizations part of the IRS engaged in a process where they were targeting for pretty significant scrutiny only certain groups that had a name like Tea Party or something like that. So they engaged in conduct which is totally inappropriate, and the Inspector General for the Treasury Department just completed a report where one of the basic conclusions of that report was that the IRS had used inappropriate criteria when they focused on those individual groups and not all groups who were in that category, the so-called 501c4 category. So there's no dispute now that conduct was at a minimum inappropriate. Some believe, and we'll see what the further investigation reveals, some believe that it was more than just inappropriate, that it might have been worse than that. It might have been unlawful or criminal conduct. I can't make that assessment. I'm not a prosecutor, nor should politicians, unless you have a lot of evidence. But at a minimum, it was wrong, and those who engage in that conduct should be sanctioned, should be held accountable. That might mean that several people are fired, but at a minimum, they have to tear out by the roots this problem so that Americans can once again, and it might take a long time for this to happen, but so that Americans can once again be confident that the IRS, in this instance or in any instance, isn't making political judgments about whom or about what organizations that they apply scrutiny to. So that's one of the things that we've had to do in response to that was I sent a letter to Secretary Jack Lew, he's the Treasury Secretary, sent him a letter a number of days ago that basically said, you must implement all of the 9 recommendations of the Inspector General report that was done by his department. So that's basic. Secondly, we had a hearing on Tuesday in the Finance Committee. I'm a member of the committee, and we were examining not only just the body of the report, but also examining 2 individuals, the former IRS commissioner and the former acting commissioner. And what I said to them was, and both of them were in the management, I said that to both of them, this was a management failure. And I looked at both of them when I said that. And I also said that, and especially with regard to Mr. Schulman, the former commissioner, I said, you haven't expressed the kind of contrition for the conduct that was engaged in. You know, you're the one that they reported to ultimately, and you should express more contrition, even though he hasn't been commissioner for the last 6 months. So a lot more work to do on this, but I think we've taken substantial steps to hold people accountable and also to put the ship on the right course, so to speak.
Do you think the IRS should be scrutinizing some of these groups? I think maybe the larger issue really is that these groups are nonprofit status and they are raising lots of money that gets put back into the political system. And is that something that the government should be looking at?
Those kinds of groups should be the subject of scrutiny. But the first thing we have to do is make sure that this problem is dealt with. That, as I said before, you tear out by the roots this problem in the IRS as it relates to this kind of conduct, so that it never happens again, or you reduce the likelihood that it happens again. After that takes place, we all need to come back, Democrats and Republicans. After people are held accountable, maybe people are fired, maybe even prosecuted. After that is all done, we do need to have a conversation about not just the tax code provisions themselves, what the tax code, the law says with regard to 501c4 organizations. In my judgment, we should clarify or better enforce the law so that no 501c4 organization is involved in politics of any kind, not just a little bit or some, zero. That's what if they want this exemption from taxation, they've got to pay the price of having nothing to do with politics. So we've got to make that very clear. But we can't do that really until this controversy is first dealt with and people are held accountable.
A lot of Republicans are really upset about the Benghazi issue. Do you have anything to say about that? Do you think that they're blowing it out of proportion?
Well, I think on that question, in the context of the investigation as it relates to Benghazi, that's a wholly different question than this IRS question. Number one, because when this happened, remember, this happened September the 11th of 2012. Within days of that attack on our post in Benghazi, there were questions raised and debates raging all throughout Washington and around the country about what happened, how it happened, and all of that. We had fairly exhaustive hearings in the Foreign Relations Committee, of which I'm a member. We had classified briefings that I attended and others attended. There were hearings in the Intelligence Committee and classified opportunities for members of the Senate and the House to review. Emails to review the back and forth, to review the films. If you look at I was able to see in a classified setting the films, the security films of what happened there. To be able to see what happened not just over an hour or two, but many hours. So it's received a pretty serious review already. That doesn't mean there aren't more questions to ask, but I think I'd put this in a different category than the IRS controversy, because Benghazi has been the subject of lots of review. The State Department, by statute, had a report done which resulted in a long list of problems and areas for corrective action by the State Department. That's already underway. It's been underway for months. So I hope those that want to return to this topic and have more hearings and more review, I hope that they're not engaged in any kind of politics here. The last thing we need in Washington is more politics, and ever more so when it comes to something as serious as an attack on an American facility, an outpost, where you have the death of Americans, including an American ambassador. We need to take all the politics out of this and look at this as members of the Foreign Relations Committee did for many weeks. There wasn't a Democratic way or a Republican way to look at this. And I think that's what we've got to continue. If people are going to use Benghazi for some political agenda, and I hope people aren't going to do that, I think we're all going to be the worse off for that. And we need to find out facts. I think a lot of those are pretty clear now, but I'm always open to listening to more arguments about other questions we can ask.
The Affordable Care Act is another hot topic right now. Many businesses and school districts right here in Lancaster County are cutting back employee hours to avoid complying with some of those regulations.
Right.
How do you feel the implementation of the ACA is going, and are there any changes that need to be made?
Excuse me. No, there's a long way to go when it comes to not just implementing the Affordable Care Act, but the work, the preparation that will take place now over the next several months to prepare people for full implementation. I have no doubt about one thing. that it's going to be difficult. I have no doubt that this is going to be a rocky period. But if you believe, as I believe, that we have to take steps in this country to cover more Americans, so that those very high percentage, 85% or more of Americans who have insurance, are not paying an extra cost, as every American is now who's covered is paying somewhere between $900 and $1,000 every year to cover those who don't have insurance. If you believe that that's a problem that needs correction, you've got to believe in a process to fix that problem. If you believe, as I believe, our healthcare costs are not just out of control, but are driving and are the main driver of the deficit. If you believe that, you got to do something about it. You can't just stand up and say this is bad and that's bad and walk away from it. So we have to do everything we can, members of Congress especially, the administration, and I think a lot of others in our healthcare system who play a role in this, have to come together and work together to make sure this implementation goes as well as possible. Does that mean we're going to make changes to the law? Absolutely. I'm not in the caucus of everything's perfect, don't touch it. That's the wrong caucus to be in. And I'm also not in the caucus that says, let's just repeal it and walk away. Unfortunately, you have some of those voices in Washington. What I believe is we have to come together to have as seamless and as effective an implementation as possible. Make sure that small businesses have the information they need on how this will affect their employees, how it will affect their tax questions, and also Americans, so that when Americans are deciding, how do I go on the exchange, how do I make decisions, that all of that information is made available. So the IRS has an important role to play here, the Small Business Administration, the Department of Health and Human Services have roles to play. But politicians have a role to play as well. They can't just check out and criticize and demagogue. Politicians have to be responsible, they have to be nonpartisan, and we've got to get this right. We've got to reduce healthcare costs, we've got to expand access to healthcare, or we're all worse off if we don't do that.
Why do you feel like it's taken so long to get the information out to people about the benefit, some of the things that they have to comply with?
Right, some of that is happening now. The information is, I think, just beginning to reach people. But one problem with providing information to individuals a year or longer, even many months prior to them making a decision, is they might learn about it and then there's a time gap. What Health and Human Services has to do is make sure that people get enough information and have it contemporaneous with the time they have to decide. Okay, so they don't learn a lot and then forget about it months later. So that's one problem. The other problem is businesses might need even more time because they have to make decisions that might be of longer duration than an individual might have to make. So we were just on the phone yesterday with a business owner in Pennsylvania who has, about 1,700 employees across the state. We're hearing from people like that. We're hearing from small business people who say, I don't understand what my obligations are. I have to talk to my controller. They don't understand. My accountant doesn't understand or can't get the right information. So the executive branch, principally Health and Human Services, the Small Business Administration, and IRS, have to continually provide that information in as timely a fashion as possible. So I think you're going to see a lot of activity really starting in June throughout the rest of the year.
Transportation is another issue on the minds of local residents. A new report found that Pennsylvania's roads and bridges are the worst in the nation. What role should the federal government take in addressing that issue?
Well, a large part of that is what happens when we have a transportation bill. In the old days of even 10 years ago, maybe, even less than 10 years ago, we used to have transportation bills that were at least 5 years of duration. It's been very difficult in the partisan atmosphere of Washington to get a 5-year bill. Last year, fortunately, the Congress finally came together on a 27-month bill, which is very helpful to have in place. It wasn't perfect. things in that bill that not all of us agreed upon, but it was a bipartisan bill that came together. So that's of significant value, I think, to our states. But as you know, a lot of transportation policy is not just what happens at the federal level, but the State Department of Transportation and the administration, the Corbett administration working with the General Assembly in Harrisburg, they have a major role to play as well. We have a substantial challenge in Pennsylvania because of the number of road miles. We have, when you add up all the road miles, we have more than most states and sometimes more than a lot of states combined. So we have a huge challenge, and it has to be a federal and state combined effort. And I think it can be bipartisan. On a lot of things, Senator Toomey and I try to work together, and sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But I've also worked together with Chairman Schuster, new chairman of the House Transportation Committee of Pennsylvania, and we've worked together on a number of projects, including Route 219 in southwestern Pennsylvania. So you've got to have not just a federal and state effort to work together, but you also have to have a bipartisan working relationship.
Well, now that you brought that up, it seems that a lot of issues are falling by the wayside because Congress can't work together. Can you talk a little bit about your opinions on the separation, the partisan atmosphere there in Washington?
Yeah, I'm as frustrated as anyone. Maybe the frustration level is higher and more intense when it comes to taxpayers. You know, taxpayers who go to work every day and have to work in a business or in a plant or a work site where they can't, when they disagree, just walk off the job or shut the lights out. They've got to continue working, continue to try to work with people. Sometimes people they don't get along with, they have to figure out a way to work together. Families do this all the time. You can't just walk out or say I don't agree with a family member and I'm just going to walk away. So Congress needs to take some lessons from our families and our businesses where people work together when they don't agree. Members of Congress, though, can't just lament the problem. You've got to look in the mirror, first and foremost, and ask yourself, what are you doing as a member of Congress to try to bring people together? And some of us do more than others. None of us are perfect. What I've tried to do, and I could do more myself, but what I've tried to do is to figure out ways to work together, not only with Senator Toomey, someone of a different political party, and we don't always vote together. We have different approaches to a lot of big issues. But we found a way to work together to try to establish a working relationship that's built upon trust. Mm-hmm. You have to trust each other before you can work together. You have to know each other a little bit. So I think we've both worked hard to do that. But you can't stop there. You've got to try to engage in conversations and discussions with people of the other party as well as your own party. What I've tried to do, and I've done more of this, frankly, since the last election was over in November 2012, to try to actually go to the offices of a number of Republican senators and engage in conversations about an issue or just figure out a way to get to know each other. That's part of the problem here. When we vote from Monday to Thursday, often people leave on Thursday because you've got to go back to your state to talk to constituents and learn about challenges the state is having, to see your family, to do a lot of things that people expect us to do. But you have to try to use that window of time from Monday to Thursday to better understand and work together with people of the other political party. And none of us are doing enough. We could all do more. Some are doing more than others. So I think we've got to ask ourselves that basic question.
I also wanted to know what your position was, federal regulations on fracking. That's a huge issue in Pennsylvania right now. Not so much in Lancaster County, but it does affect us as a state.
Well, fracking is, as we know, the process of extracting natural gas from the earth. Just that extraction process has to be done in compliance not only with regulations in the law, whether it's state environmental laws or federal laws, but it should be done in the spirit of what Pennsylvanians expect. You know, we had decades, really generations, where when we were extracting coal from the ground in the 1800s, well into the 1900s, we weren't doing it with enough awareness of or compliance with rules and regulations, or at least the spirit of doing it so that you don't compromise the water, you don't somehow run afoul of our state's constitutional provision. A lot of people may remember that in the early 70s, our state's constitution, this is Article 1, Section 27 of the Constitution, it says the people shall have a right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. And I happen to memorize those lines, but then it goes on to talk about all of us as citizens of Pennsylvania being trustees of our environment for the next generation. It's a very powerful provision in the state's constitution. I'm bound by that as a federal official. So is every elected official who's elected in Pennsylvania, state, county, local, state government, federal government. So that's what we're bound by. But I think we can maintain our fidelity to those principles and to the laws that regulate clean air and clean water, or how we achieve that, with the obvious benefit we're getting from natural gas. We're doing some great things with natural gas drilling, creating tens of thousands of jobs, which is good, and we should continue that, and creating an energy opportunity, the likes of which we have never ever seen in American history, to the point where we can, in some of our lifetimes, we don't know whether it be 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, but within a reasonable period of time, we will be free of Middle East oil. And that's not a wild-eyed prediction. That's something we can achieve if we keep working together. So I think we can balance these interests, having all of the protections and vigilance on clean air and clean water in place, and also derive the great job and economic benefit as well as the energy benefit. And I have legislation that speaks to all those priorities.
But some of the regulations that the federal government passed in relation to these companies that are doing the fracking was skirting some of those Clean Air Act regulations.
Well, there's no question that there's what I would consider a loophole in federal law that I think we should fill. That's why I have the FRAC Act that I've introduced and will be introducing again. So I think that's a problem. If we can be candid about it, I don't see that legislation passing the House anytime soon, and frankly, it'd be a challenge in the Senate as well. But let's assume, as we should to be candid, let's assume that doesn't pass the Congress. Then what we have to do is make sure that state government, whether it's Pennsylvania through the Department of Environmental Protection or any state government. Well, let's just talk about our state. We have to make sure that our state government, through the Department of Environmental Protection, so-called DEP, does their job. We have to hold them accountable and make sure that they're vigilant to enforce the Pennsylvania rules as it relates to hydraulic fracturing.
Let's turn the focus to state government. Do that a little bit. To what extent do you think Tom Corbett is vulnerable, and who do you support as a Democrat in the 2014 race?
Well, first of all, on the question of the governor's race overall, I'll leave it to the pundits to assess potential vulnerabilities or likelihood of success, all of that. I'm going to be supporting strongly the nominee of the Democratic Party for governor. I don't know who that will be, and you don't really expect me to pick a candidate in this interview.
Do you think?
I can make a little bit of news, but I probably won't do that today. But look, of the ones who are announced, or the ones who are likely to announce, they're all people that I know. I've known for years, some longer than others. They're people with great ability, and we'll see what the primary process, what unfolds, I should say, with the primary process. This, as you know, this doesn't become official until they file their nominating petitions next year, January and February of next year. So we really won't know who's running for governor on the Democratic side until there's a formal, until they're actually on the ballot. So we don't know whether it'll be down to one or it'll be two or three or whatever. I just offer one opinion on this. I don't think having a primary necessarily means that it puts Democrats at a disadvantage. In fact, I think if you look at the last three I think I'm right about this, the last 3 Democratic governors, each of them had a primary. Some very difficult primaries, but they got through the primary and they're able to still win in November. So I don't think a primary is necessarily an adverse outcome for Democrats. But of course, we've got to try to keep people working together when that process is over so that we can have a nominee that can prevail in November.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking our questions and being here with us today.
Well, thanks very much. This was a fun way to do it, and maybe we should do this more often around the state.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.